last, so pat yourselves on the back for being here at the end. I have the absolute pleasure and distinction to welcome to Huntsville Mr. John Matherly, the CEO and founder of Shodan. I'm just so thrilled to have him here in Huntsville. I made the plane ride over here, and just all of us together really showcased to him a true thought leader and rock star in cybersecurity, what we as a community can do for cyber, what we're doing, and how we're moving the ball forward. So I've been really proud of what we've accomplished here, and I think John is just an amazing rock star person. I think somebody was asking for his autograph earlier. Perfect person to close this out. The creator of the world's first search engine for Internet of Things. I think every keynote speaker that we've heard has mentioned the security for the Internet of Things. Again, this is the guy, and he's here in Huntsville, and an amazing speaker, an amazing personality, a wonderful person. And please welcome John Matherly to the stage.
Hello everybody. So thank you very much for staying for the very end. And as Jamie said, my name is John Matherly and I'm the founder of Shodan. So I'm guessing a decent amount of you have already heard of Shodan and will know what it is, but for the very few who do not know what it is, we basically scan the entire internet, find all connected devices, and collect metadata about it. We make that information available in the form of a website, which most people use, and we also offer it as a database, so full download for institutional guys, but it's a different thing. So the way it works, I just want to describe this briefly, so this is as technical as I'm going to get. It scans 24/7, it does random distribution of scans, it's distributed, meaning that we have crawlers located in China, we have crawlers located in Russia, obviously US, Iceland, Netherlands. The idea is that many US businesses, they block all traffic categorically from China. The same is probably true in reverse for the US from other countries. So we are purposely distributed, so we are not biased in our data collection. We provide data for everything. And yeah, so our guarantee is that we scan the internet for a few hundred ports at least once a month. Realistically, it's more than that, but that's the guarantee we give. In terms of use cases, obviously we have a lot of security people that use it, you guys. What you might not be aware of is that there are many other use cases for this type of data. This is an example where a lab out of Canada, based out of the University of Toronto, they were using it to track Western vendors selling surveillance equipment to Syria, Libya, and those kind of regions, which are technically sanctioned by certain companies that are still selling their equipment there. So you can keep track of it. You can find out who's actually financing or providing technology for these companies to suppress free speech. Now obviously you keep track of malware. This is something I do on a monthly basis, where you can basically keep track of which hackers have compromised the most websites. You can create rankings, you can track it over time, this kind of stuff. And the newest thing for Shodan, and I don't know how many people have ever heard about this, but probably not many. Cyber insurance is the fastest growing insurance market. Most insurance companies want to start offering cyber insurance. And they started to go to DEF CON, Black Hat, and security conferences. Because in order to insure their customers and determine the risk that they're taking on by insuring the customers, they would need to understand their computer security. So they go to Shodan and they find out, is anybody that we're trying to insure, are they running telnet, are they running Modbus, are they vulnerable to Heartbeat? And if they are, that's going to impact the premiums and deductibles. That makes sense. So a lot of other industries are starting to look at this sort of network security data for purposes that you may not be aware of. And this is the website. It looks like a search engine. It's not quite as easy to use as Google if you ever tried using it. And we did it on purpose, by the way. We on purpose to not make it as easy to use as just typing in SCADA and we find all the control systems. It's meant for technical users. We did it on purpose. If you start using Shodan, you can expect to see stuff like this. This is a control system for a home. This is optimized for an iPhone. That's why everything is stretched out and big buttons. You can pull this up and you can turn lights on and off. You can find large industrial control systems, like this is a hydroelectric dam in France. And I like bringing up this example, it's been out there for a few years. This is a perfect example of the typical response from an OT guy to being notified that something is connected. So my friend Dan Tendler, he discovered this. He didn't realize what it was, but he tweeted it. And somebody on Twitter who does ICS told him, you should contact the DHS, you should tell somebody about this. And Dan had no idea how to do that, so again, Twitter had connections and did it. The next day at 6 o'clock in the morning, my friend Dan gets a phone call from the DHS. And he's like, my name is Anthony, blah, blah, blah. Can you tell me how you located this? And Dan, he's freaking out a bit because he's getting a call early in the morning from the DHS. And they're like, no, we're very friendly. So the DHS goes to the French government. The French government finds out a bonus IP address. They contact the asset owner. The asset owner says, yes, we're aware, it's online. Yes, go on. The government says, please take this offline. This is not okay. You shouldn't have this connected to the internet. And like, no, this is working as intended. We need to have this online so we can access it remotely. And like, you realize everybody else can access it remotely as well. And they're like, well, no, we have a static IP address. This is the technical expertise level that you're dealing with. These many OT guys, they do not have any understanding of how the internet works or how IT works. It took 2 years to take this offline. 2 years. And obviously, nowadays you can find anything you can imagine that could have a computer inside, lighting, air, everything. Right? Probably has a computer inside, probably hooked up to the internet somewhere. I'm not going to give the whole presentation on the crazy stuff you can find. There are other people that have done that. So I'm here to talk about IoT and ICS, which is to a large degree which one is known for. And I categorize it in 2 different segments. There's the consumer level IoT, which you know with Nest and DropCam, and then there's the industrial side of things. Wind farms, power plants. And my journey with IoT started with the industrial side of things. So Shodan launched in 2009. In 2010, there was some research done in finding ICS using web servers. And in 2011, I got a request from a consulting company which focuses on ICS. And it said, we would love you to scan for Modbus. If you're not familiar with Modbus, it's the most popular ICS protocol. Most ICS systems support to some degree. But nothing else most popular. So I got the request, and I started asking around to my security friends, because I'm not an ICS guy. In my IT, my background is more in IT. I asked my friends, and they're like, don't do it, man. Just don't even touch it. Just by trying to scan for these control systems, you might inadvertently take them offline, you might cause a blackout, you're going to cause damage, the end of the world's going to happen. You just touch them. You just try to connect, not even sending any data. And that seems very fishy to me and kind of scary in its own way, the idea that trying to identify the problem might actually be a problem, like create a problem. That was a bit perplexing to me. So I actually didn't touch it for a while. It was in the back burner, I kept looking at it. I didn't know how to do it effectively. But then Trend Micro, they set up a bunch of honeypots to determine whether other people are scanning the internet for ICS, and they detected all these attacks against their honeypots. And so from that report, you can tell that other people, regardless of whether Shodan is doing it, other people are active and trying to identify these control systems. And then there was also Internet Census 2012. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with this, but there's one guy, he compromised 500,000 routers, installed Nmap on them, and Nmapped the internet. And he made all the data available publicly. It's like 10 terabytes compressed, released in 2012. He did very good research, obviously highly illegal, but amazing research. Amazing research. And the idea that you could run Nmap against the internet, and this went completely under the radar. Because he did it from so many different IPs, completely under the radar. This popped overnight, and everybody knew, where did this come from? But if he can do it with Nmap, I can probably do it as well in a safe way. And so that's what I started doing. And my first observation is that ICS is terrible. Right, just across the board, I specified ecosystem. Again, I come from an IT background. You have proper tooling, you have proper testing, documentation. Right? These are things that you expect if you're a software engineer. In ICS, good luck. It's a complete nightmare. This is the kind of stuff you see in ICS. If Apple tomorrow came out with an app that looked like this, you would not be too happy. Right? I mean, usability matters. Some engineers discount it, but it really matters in terms of maintenance. If you hire a new person and need to take this over, how is a new engineer going to be able to manage this and make any changes safely? Now, ICS is just a spaghetti code all around. And then with ICS, you also have this notion that the actual protocols The language they use to communicate between control systems is proprietary. So you can't even try to create an open source or understand how something works unless you are a customer of the vendor, unless you buy access to their protocol. Everywhere else on the internet, that's not how it works. HTTP, FTPs are open protocols. We understand the specifications. They're very well tested. They're very well understood. It's not the case with ICS for a long time, hasn't been. Even the open source stuff was not that great, to be honest. You know, Modbus, probably one of the earlier Modbus implementations that was open source. Really hard to use, really hard to use. And I really experienced this when I was working at the ICS Village in DEF CON. So DEF CON last year and the year before had a village where Siemens and some other vendors brought in their PLCs with the premise that you bring the PLCs and hackers will have fun with them. You know, they're going to find new vulnerabilities, you're going to get your money's worth back just by the work that the hackers are doing. Nobody was able to successfully talk Modbus with these PLCs, not a single person. Every single one of them just was trying to attack this with SQL injection and web attacks. This is the DEF CON crowd. I thought we would have more people that knew how to program or interface with these things. Hasn't been the case. Really not. It's gotten a bit better because the tooling's gotten better. But 2 years ago, everybody just treated this like a web server. They didn't even know where to begin to use Modbus. So it's gotten much better recently. Nowadays, there are some open frameworks that are easier to test. This one is OpenDNP3. They have a simulator, fully documented, client, server, everything. I consider the reference implementation at this point for DNP3. And they have other things on GitHub. So it's getting fairly popular. And if you're not familiar with Stack Overflow, I know many developers are here, but Stack Overflow is basically the location you go if you have any questions or programming related things. If you don't know how to do something, this is the Google for developers. And what I did, to give you an idea of how the interest in ICS has grown for the past few years, this is a chart of the number of questions about Modbus on a yearly basis. So in 2007, there was practically nothing, and now we have in 2014, 2015, again more. We're around 400 questions. So it's basically increased significantly over the past few years. The interest by the average developer community, not OT guys, in control systems is increasing. And the same is also true for some of the other protocols back in Siemens and 7. Modbus is still the most popular one. And these are all the things that Shodan looks at. So after a few years of looking at all these things, we index many different protocols. Here is a breakdown for the numbers. And what I'd like to point out is that the majority of control systems right now are buildings. Niagara, BACnet, offices, churches, universities, it's buildings. Buildings are by far the majority that we're seeing right now. We're not seeing a huge amount of power. DNP3 is mostly power. We don't see a huge amount of them. But the ones you do find are usually more interesting. And this is a breakdown by country. It's hard to read from here. The number one country with the most Modbus running is obviously the US. It shouldn't be a big surprise since the US is so connected, but not great. The following countries are Spain, Sweden, France, Italy, Canada, Japan. So Europe. First US and then Europe. What I'd like to highlight though is that China and Russia have fewer industrial control systems connected to the internet than, Russia is below Switzerland and China is less than Hungary. This is not the case for other devices that they have. But in terms of control systems, those countries do not have the same problems that the US has. Now, there are many reasons for that, but the end effect is that if you try to find control systems in Russia or China, they're going to be very few. I mean, Ukraine has way more online than Russia. I mean, maybe why we saw some recent activity. I thought it was interesting, because in other areas, in webcams, in regular servers, obviously China has a huge amount of devices. ICS, almost silent. And so, to be a bit more relevant, I actually did a search last night for ICS in Huntsville, and the number one exposure is by University of Alabama, Huntsville. So it turns out they have part of their campus connected to the internet, running Niagara Falls. This is actually very common. Universities tend to be the most exposed organizations because historically they've gotten huge IP blocks. They are not usually the most well funded. They don't have enough budgets for security, so things pop up on the internet. This is not uncommon, by the way. Many universities have their entire campuses connected to the internet. What's really interesting, some universities, they used, for Fox Niagara, there's a version that uses SSL. And so they deploy that, and they're like, oh, we're secure, we're using SSL. But there's no authentication. So it makes no difference, right? I mean, yeah, you're protected from man in the middle, but anybody can just directly connect to you. So, you know, there's some education that needs to be done. And the following ones are Comcast, and some other one, not interesting. Another one locally here, Kroger. I don't know how many Kroger stores there are in Huntsville, but one of them. They have it's a grocery store, right? Right. Sorry, Texas. It's on the internet, and this is a good example because the person installing this, they set it up and they pull it up with a browser and see a login screen. What they don't realize is that they never put a firewall in front of it, so you can still talk to it over the actual ICS protocol. And the ICS protocol doesn't have any authentication. There's no capacity for authentication in most ICS protocols. So you look at this and you're like, no, I'm secure. You know, there's a login, I'm good, I changed the passwords. But they didn't actually prevent the ICS access. So you can just skip the web interface and talk directly to the PLC. Right? And another thing I would like to mention to people that work in security, please don't just change the ports. This is like this newfangled idea that let me just change the ports and then I'm going to be secure. Shodan also scans for one-off ports and some other port combinations. It turns out most humans are very bad at generating random numbers. It's true. You know, if you think putting SSH on port 2222 is a good idea, I'm telling you, it's not going to protect you at all. So for Modbus, you know, that number's been growing, by the way. It used to be like in the low hundreds. Over the past few years, I've seen more utilities and everybody's like, oh, well, you know, nobody's going to find this, but it's on 503. We're good. Done, you know. Moving on. The good news among all of this is that in terms of growth, so we've been doing this for several years, we keep track of how it's been changing. And ICS, unlike, you know, IoT, which everybody says is exploding like crazy and growing leaps and bounds, ICS, as you'd probably expect, is a slow-moving industry, and it's getting worse, but it's getting worse slowly. Right? Numbers are slowly creeping up. So you don't need to care about the individual slices, but just a general upward trend. Right? More things are getting connected to the internet, but not at an alarming, you know, Bruce Willis kind of rate. We're going to be fine. We don't need to call the end of the world just yet. And whenever I bring up this data, the first response I get, at least from reporters, is, well, why haven't we fixed this? You know, what's going on? We're aware of the problem, we're not fixing it. One of the issues is that the majority of the ICS devices are mobile networks. Tracking them down is nigh impossible. You know, I can't go to Verizon Wireless, which is the #1 hosting provider for ICS. I can't go to them and tell them, hey, who are your customers for these IP ranges? You know, I'd like to contact them. And the ICS cert can also not do that. So it's very difficult to actually notify the asset owners. That's a big hurdle. And the other one, as you'd expect, education is still pretty bad. This is out of the official documentation from one of the vendors, Omron. And I quote, when a router is forwarding a TCP or UDP port to an Omron PLC, the traffic is being delivered to a non-Windows-based operating system. This makes the PLC impenetrable to standard hacking methods. So like, don't worry about it. This isn't Windows, we're safe. Right, that's the message you're giving to the customers. The documentation I found this in is where they tell you how to open up your firewall. This is the official Omron documentation where they tell you how to open up your firewall so you can allow remote connections, and it's okay to allow remote connections because it's not Windows. Right? This is still in their current documentation. I've tweeted this, I've let them know, whatever. And another thing is, IPv6 will not protect you. For some reason in the security community, we're under the assumption, like we used to be with IPv4, that the address space is too big, we will never be able to find everything on it. Let's please not go down the same road again. Let's not pretend like IPv6 is too big and nobody will ever figure out how to crawl it effectively. Shodan's already crawling it. And we've already located control systems on IPv6. This is one example. So I would like to, from the start, get rid of this myth that IPv6 will be of any help for security. Do not accept that. It's not going to be true. IPv6, again, is non-random. There are many things you can do, many tricks. Obviously, it's different than IPv4, but let's not go down that road. And whenever I start talking about ICS, people, it's hard to believe sometimes. When you tell somebody a nuclear power plant is connected to the internet, they say, well, surely that cannot be true. Surely there's somebody, maybe it's Trend Micro. Trend Micro is putting up these really serious nuclear power plants so they can attract attacks. They're all honeypots. And I was like, all right, well, let me start doing some research into this. So I see a lot of honeypots, obviously, since I scan the internet all the time, Shodan. And so I started looking at some of these industrial protocols, and I decided on Siemens S7 because it returns a lot of information. This is a sample banner that Shodan collects. This is information that we gather. PLC name, information, firmware. By the way, in ICS, it's very interesting that they will give you more information than you could possibly need. As a web developer, if you set up a web server, they tell you to remove the Apache version information, hide as much information in banners as you can. With ICS, it's the opposite. They want to give you as much information as possible so that their support guys can easily debug whatever issue you're having. So it's a different use case, but that's why when you talk to ICS systems, you will be able to grab a lot of information without, again, any authentication. So it's a different mentality. And if you start looking at the PLC names, you break down the frequency of them. The number one is Symantec 300, which is not, it's a very popular Siemens PLC, sort of lower end. And the second one is Technodrome. Why am I seeing so many Technodrome on the internet? And it's a default configuration for a Compot honeypot. It's the most popular one. And so I started looking at the deployment of these things. And there are a few lessons that I learned. First of all, don't put an ICS on Amazon Cloud. This is maybe not obvious to many people, but real control systems, real nuclear power plants, are not hosted on Amazon. Right? Makes sense? Yes. Don't do it. If you're trying to collect information from a honeypot, you need to put it in a realistic hosting provider. You never see nuclear power plant on Amazon. Second, obviously change defaults. Here, somebody changed the PLC name, but they didn't change the serial number, so easily identifiable. Another one is the idea that you set up a honeypot now, and you're using defaults. You just install it. Shodan picks it up. Shodan scans it. Next day, you change the configuration because you're like, okay, I'm going to do it properly. I'm going to change all the defaults. I'm going to create a totally custom template. Nobody will ever know it's a honeypot. Well, you've already been indexed by Shodan once. So if you were a honeypot in the past, and now you don't look like a honeypot anymore, you're still a honeypot. Right? The chances of the same IP running Siemens S7 or whatever ICS protocol on the same IP is very unlikely. So if you're once a honeypot and you've been scanned by anything before, I'm sorry, you need to get rid of that honeypot. You need to deploy it from the get-go the right way. And so I also did some heuristics. I wrote a machine learning algorithm to analyze all the banners. And an interesting observation was, again, humans are not necessarily as good as they think they are when it comes to detecting patterns. In this case, Technodrome was an OK classifier. Serial numbers were an OK classifier for identifying honeypots. The number one classifier was OEM. It turns out that OEM sounds very official. It sounds like something that might be returned by a PLC. It never is by real PLCs. Only honeypots. So people will change the entire banner, change every facet, but they leave OEM in there because it's OEM. Sounds technical. No, turns out if you leave OEM in there, it's guaranteed that you're a honeypot. Guaranteed. And yeah, the results are much better. And the final thing is that if you have a custom configuration, you can't deploy it across hundreds of honeypots. Right? You can't use the same configuration for hundreds of IPs. Everything has to be unique because every ICS has unique responses, somewhere or another. So after all this work, I can say that less than 5% are actual honeypots, right? So I think it's important to actually classify it so we know that at least 5%, or less than, this is a bit conservative, less than 5% are honeypots. And the final lesson is you just don't use defaults. Whatever you do, move away from defaults. It's a bad idea. And if you ever want to check your honeypot, I wrote a tool that does everything that I just described in an automated way. It'll check all these things. It won't actually classify you as, I'm not feeding this back into Shodan in any way. This is just, if you set up a honeypot, you can run this tool, and it'll tell you whether it is detected as a honeypot based on the criteria I just laid out. This is sort of a validation for honeypot owners that I make available. Only for ICS honeypots, though. This is not for general web honeypots yet. Working on that. So, moving on to the consumer side of things, there's a whole bunch of stuff coming out. I mean, it's gotten crazy. This is an egg carton that will let you know how many eggs you have left in your refrigerator, because we all know we're at work and you want to make an omelet when you get home. You really, really need those eggs. You want to make sure you have enough. And that's why they're solving these important problems for you. So this is, you can pull up on your iPhone and you're like, all right, I have 3 eggs left, I need to buy more eggs. This is cool. So IoT is everywhere, right? It's exploding. Funny side story to this one, you can't buy it anymore. It was available for a few years. You can't buy it anymore because it turns out that electronics do not function very well in refrigerated environments. So it turns out the battery didn't last very long. It was a great idea. Many people loved it. When they discontinued it, there was a lot of hate mail posted on the forum, like, why did you discontinue it? People really liked it. And yeah, people are going nuts. You can watch YouTube on your refrigerator now, tweet from there, and if you're really into social media. I know we all have busy lives, but I'm not exactly sure we're that busy that we need to watch a YouTube video on the refrigerator. And it's getting weird too, right? This is from a Singapore airport. They have a touch screen. So after you take care of your business, you can provide feedback, right? Everybody likes doing surveys. So whatever you can imagine, people have put a computer inside it now. I don't understand. So again, nowadays you go to Walmart, you go wherever else, and chances are you're going to buy something smart. So I bought a smart TV from Walmart, and the first thing I do with anything I buy is I end-map it. So in this case, I end-mapped my TV, and sorry for the quality. It's my phone, it's data quality. What is happening is it's launching an update process. And now the application menu shows up. This was just for me launching an nmap against the IP. I'm not even trying to mess with the device. I'm not even trying to get anywhere. I just ran nmap. And it turned out that the Vizio TVs are running a Yahoo Smart TV SDK, and they decided that they would not need to switch to a production build. They will just keep a debug symbols, debug ports. So all the Vizio Smart TVs, this is still true now, they are leaving the debug port open. So the port that the developer would use to connect to and to test their software against, giving you full access to the TV, is still open on all Vizio TVs. So I've been able to keep track of these TVs for the past few years. I also do, by the way, so I also keep track of Rokus and things like that. And with Rokus, you can actually download a list of channels. So I have my own App Store ranking for Roku. I can tell you what apps, which channels customers of Roku are watching, what they care about. Because Roku will send you all the information without authentication. So I did it for TVs as well. And the numbers, they were pretty low last year. But this year, it's been growing a lot. Like not even halfway through the year, already, basically tenfold numbers increase in terms of smart TVs on the internet. It's growing. These are not numbers like you see in the news. I don't see trillions of devices because there are, only 4 billion IPv4 addresses, so that's kind of the limit that Shodan can have. Obviously, IPv6 is different, but still, a lot of things are increasing. And this is not just limited to Vizio. This is really across the board. I also looked at Smart Things Hub. this hub that was bought by Samsung, I think, and they're running telnet. That's what they're using, and static password. And the reason it's still in there is because an engineer added it for testing purposes, and the engineer left the company, and now nobody else really is in charge of anything for that service, and they just don't want to touch it. They're like, well, we have it there. But after I came out with this research, I contacted them, and they said, okay, we'll fix this, we'll get rid of it. And what they did is moved it to a different port. So, and of course, I own the SmartThings hub, so I saw they're releasing a new firmware, I get the patch, I nmap it again, I'm like, oh, it's a different port. I don't understand the mentality sometimes, but this is what was happening right now with IoT. And a lot of people in security, they say, well, I don't believe in all this new IoT stuff. I'm not going to buy into that, I'm not going to do it. You will not have a choice. The SmartThings hub is being built or integrated into the Samsung TVs. You buy a TV, guess what? You get an IoT hub included. They want to give you the hub, right? So you're not going to have a choice. Whether you like it or not, unless you totally live in a cave, you're going to become part of IoT. Really, if you think you can get totally away from it, you're going to have a really hard time. So I also took a look at the network side of things. So, the IoT is the device, and the device talks to the cloud. And so I took a look at where these guys hosted, and many of them are obviously running in the cloud. And if you're familiar with Amazon, the cloud is probably the most attacked network in the world, and a lot of MongoDB, a lot of Redis, a lot of people run default configurations. Some guys did an analysis of the Docker images. So most people, when they go to the cloud, they take an existing image, they spin it up, and then it's sort of a black box. They assume that, I guess, Amazon will do some, security for them, or whatever else, or that the image they're using is already safe. That's not the case. The majority of the images have vulnerabilities in them by default. So the idea that you can get rid of the system administrator just by having DevOps moving to the cloud has opened up a whole new world of security problems. So I worked together with OpenDNS to get a breakdown of different vendors, and this graph is impossible to read, but almost every single IoT vendor has a huge attack surface, a ridiculous attack surface that is really embarrassing. Western Digital is the really big bar, so they're trying to position themselves as an IoT hard drive. For all the IoT devices, they can store their data on Western Digital Cloud. So they're running telnet. I don't even know why you would install telnet on Amazon. I don't understand, but they're running telnet. Just really bizarre deployment situations. And of all the vendors that I looked at, 20 something. A third of them were vulnerable to these SSL issues. And really, bottom of the barrel issues, they're affected by them across the board. Another issue with consumer electronics is that in other areas, they operate under the idea of planned obsolescence. They understand that most of their customers with cell phones are going to replace their device after 2 or 3 years. So when you engineer them, you don't need to engineer them to last 10 years. You engineer them with the idea that after 2 or 3 years, you're going to upgrade to something else. Or you can encourage them to upgrade. It's a reasonable expectation for smartphones, and it means that you don't need to invest as many engineering resources into making it last a long time. A side effect for that with IoT is that these are physical devices. You're deploying them in the real world. The UK, they love their cameras, I guess. They deploy them everywhere. This is an instance where a town deployed CCTV cameras, but then they had a downturn in the economy, and they couldn't afford the personnel to manage the CCTV cameras anymore. So they can't pay the salaries for the guys who monitor cameras, but they're not going to remove the cameras because they already paid for them, they already installed them. So what they did now is they just let them connect to the network and nobody's looking at them. They don't have the manpower to actually monitor the cameras, but since they already paid for them, they're still there. So you're deploying these things in the real world, but are you able to maintain them for a long time? And many people aren't. This is a whole new issue. And obviously, with Corky, the GE Wing Cup, it got worked just by an update. This is a sort of typical, emerging market problem. And then people don't realize that these IoT devices are basically computers. Omron doesn't realize that, but I think most security people realize that these are refrigerators, all these devices, they're computers, they're vulnerable to the same issues. This is an instance where a refrigerator was used to send spam. How many people know how to, if your refrigerator gets compromised, what do you do? How do you reinstall your refrigerator? Just going to return it? What if it blue screens? It's kind of crazy, but this is what's happening. There's not a level of awareness because they don't treat physical objects the way they would your desktop. And it's starting to really impact the real world. So this is, I had to blur it out. This is a Goatse image. Don't Google what it is if you don't know what it is. It's a Goatse image that was put on a billboard in an upscale area of Atlanta. It's an electronic billboard. It was connected to the internet. Somebody uploaded, an image, and it showed up. And I love the picture because you see the police officer in the corner and he just stands there and what the hell am I supposed to do? It's an electronic billboard. I don't even see where it's connected. How do I take this down? What do you do? So it took a few hours and they all freaked out and they fixed it, and then a week later it happened again, and then it's how things work. But it's starting to affect the real world, right? It's different than if your desktop gets compromised. This is the real world, has different consequences. So I started taking a look at some of these devices. What I focused on was a license plate reader. These are cameras that people are setting up, or law enforcement or the private companies are setting up, and they take pictures of every car that drives through the camera. Not just red light cameras, but any car that drives through the camera. They take a picture, they OCR the license plate, and everything is stored in a central database. The idea is a law enforcement can keep track of, a burglar or somebody, and they know a license plate. They can see which intersections they just went through recently. They can keep track of that. Towing companies want to know it in case they're trying to locate a car, things like that. But they're on the internet. And so I started taking a look at them. And if you pull them up on the website, like the device has a web server, you pull it up, and you're going to get a real-time stream. On the left side is a real-time stream of all the pictures it's collecting, and on the right side, the decoded information about the license plate in the car. So everything is there. And that's okay, but it's kind of hard to deal with. So I started first mapping where they are, and it became painfully obvious that somebody in Louisiana really liked these cameras, but also really didn't understand about how to secure them. And there are some in Los Angeles. And that turned out being, University, UCLA, I think he said. And if you tell yourself, well, just a license plate picture is probably hard to work with, and it's a lot of work to actually OCR the image and get all the information out yourself. Don't worry, it did it for you. Every image also includes all the encoded OCR information. So you get the image and you get all the OCR thing in one fell swoop. And to collect the data, the way it works is you find out the IP address of the camera and you send it hello. That's all you do, send it hello. And then for eternity, it will send back all images to you. It'll just keep streaming everything back until you tell stop. Once you tell stop, then it's like, okay, I'm okay. That's how it works. So I built my own license plate database. So I should say before I did this, I worked together with the EFF and a legal counsel, and I have never released this publicly. And not the actual website of the database, because it was surprisingly easy. I didn't expect it to be this trivial to do, because you could just, I'm trying to exhaust the video. So I developed a web app that was a real-time stream of all the cameras I connected to. So in real time I could see all the cars driving through, and you can keep a history. You can be like, oh, I went to this intersection. 5 minutes later you see it at this intersection. You can see certain cars are always, 8 o'clock in the morning they're here, 5 o'clock they're at the same location again. You can really collect patterns. I didn't really get too fancy with this because I was very concerned about legal issues. But sort of as a proof of concept, I thought this was really shocking, surprisingly easy. So what I did, I connected to 100 of these cameras. I ran it for 5 days, and I collected close to 63,000 unique license plates. And what I did is not just discuss security issues, but I was also curious about What about the sort of IoT aspects that are usually sold to businesses? Because with this data, you can do a lot of cool stuff. Besides the security and privacy implications, you can write code to detect novelty license plates. So I can tell you that 1.3% of Louisiana have novelty license plates. And I think that's kind of cool. There's all these cool things you can do with this data, and I think this is more what usually is sold to businesses when it comes to IoT. This is the pitch. You know, you don't sell security usually, at least where I come from. Security is a tough sell. But if you tell them that you can get better insight about your customers, better insight about how things work, that's an easier pitch. I think that's a big premise of IoT. The idea that we're moving towards a quantified world, where you can keep track and measure empirically everything. Everything is about metrics and big data and dashboarding and all that kind of stuff. So it's about connecting computer to real-world objects so you can measure, so you know exactly what's going on. And so I did that with a few things. Here I looked at printers. Not super sexy, but you can do a lot of cool stuff with them. So printers will very generously tell you whether they're low on toner, whether they're low on paper, and so you can keep track of these things. You can say, these universities right now, they need paper, or they need toner. And you can keep up with that in real time. You can have a dashboard, and maybe HP is doing this, to keep track of which organizations need paper, need toner, and need to get contacted with things. You can do the same thing for other devices. Licenses have expired. You can keep track of all these things. Exactly, you can measure it. I also did this for control systems, and I like this a bit more because it lets me see the deployment of various renewable technologies across the globe. So I showed an index as wind turbines, and you can keep track of how many wind farms are being deployed using this technology. I'll use that slice the whole piece. But you can also find out how much power are they producing. So, for example, I can tell you that France is a big purchaser of Nordic's wind turbines, which are manufactured in Germany. And you can see which cities are building them, which ones are growing, because they'll tell you over time how the wind turbine farm is expanding. And you can measure all these things now. I think it's very powerful. And everybody agrees that with all this new stuff, everything is going to be connected. There's no going away from it. And there are some obvious privacy implications along with this. What's been interesting to me is that privacy in the US has not been, it's changed recently, I think a bit, but to a large degree, it is not a big issue. It's not a selling point. When you go to Best Buy and you pick out a webcam, nobody's going to tell you how it stores your data. Nobody's going to tell you what the company is doing to protect you and your privacy. If you go and buy Dropcam, it'll stream all your video to the Dropcam servers. Nothing is local. You share everything. That's how it works. And they pitch it to you by saying, well, we need to be able to do that so we can offer you remote access. I found this in Europe, and what they have over there is NetAtmo. It looks almost exactly like Dropcam. It's very sleek, same price range, but everything is stored locally on a micro SD card, which can store hundreds of gigabytes nowadays. And you can still access it remotely. You can opt into it. And if you opt into it, it'll punch a hole in your firewall and you can have temporary remote access. So in the US, it's been pitched as an either-or situation. Either you have privacy or you have security. In Europe, that's not the case. In Europe, they find a way to make it work. It's harder to make it work with a micro SD card, but they're making it work. So I'm not buying into the argument that some of the companies in the US are making that they need access to all your data in order to do their jobs. Companies in Europe are able to get away with that. And in Europe, there are much more governmental oversight into the privacy. So it's been interesting to me that different conversations. And the final thing I want to talk about is nothing related to a tech directly, but rather, Shodan is a fairly public project. I did a lot of interviews, a lot of news coverage, and things like that. And the first interview I ever did was with Reuters. It was a Reuters journalist. He gave me a call. This was my first interview. And we got on the phone. He said, hello, John. Hi. And the first question he has afterwards is, could you show me how to crash an elevator? Can I go to Shodan and crash an elevator? I was like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? He's like, well, I'm doing a story and I'm wondering, can you crash elevators with Shodan? I was like, no, that's not how these things work. That's not any of this works. But it just, the mindset was, how does this fit into my narrative? Right? It's not what are the capabilities of Shodan and how does the technology work. It's, I have a narrative that I need to support. How can you support me? Very often when you give interviews, they're going to ask you to paraphrase, like, would you say it does this? And then you go, yes, it does this, and then bam, they quote you. Right? Another thing is that ICS. In security world, everybody loves ICS, everybody understands ICS is important, it's a big deal, nuclear power plants. In terms of actually promoting the security of ICS, very difficult. I did an interview with Matherly from CNBC, and initially she wanted to do a documentary on industrial control systems in the US, infrastructure in the US, and how not properly maintained, there's security issues, and this is something we need to address. It's like supposed to be an hour-long segment where she talks to many different industry experts. So I do an hour-and-a-half interview with her. 6 months later, the producer comes back to me and says, hey John, I think we need to reshoot because we decided to change focus. I was like, well, okay, sure. So they come out again with a different crew. And this time, all they want me to do is show webcams. Webcams of seniors in hospitals, laying in bed, baby cameras. And I called the producer and I'm like, what's going on here? This is not all what I signed up for. This is not all what I think needs to be covered. And he said, well, we did some testing. We had an initial version of the documentary. We showed some people, focus group, and it tested very poorly. It turns out they were unable to sell ICS security as a topic. They considered that not interesting. So everybody agrees when you talk to people, yes, nuclear power plants are important, but selling it is a totally different matter. And just as a data point, personally from the Shodan website, we've been featured in many different news articles, many different types of news articles. Above is Washington Post. They did a 5-page feature on Shodan and the way it works, and it was part of a whole cybersecurity segment. Almost no traffic. Almost no traffic. I consider Washington Post to be a fairly big newspaper. There was very little interest. Very, very little interest. CNN Money does a 1-page, top 10 most dangerous things on the internet, and it crashes our website. Right? I mean, the amount of attention you get for doing these BuzzFeed type articles is orders of magnitude higher than a meaningful expose. And I think that's a big reason also why ICS for a long time has not reached the areas it needs to reach, because the media is unable to cover it in a meaningful way. It's difficult, right? It's a very technical topic. A lot of people don't think it's very exciting. So, and the final point I want to leave everybody here with is that I've been doing, Shodan has been running for 7 years now, ICS for at least 5 years. We've received less than 10 emails, and that's it's more around like 2 or 3. Less than 10 emails from people asking us, why are you scanning my ICS? Nobody's looking. Never mind IoT. No, I've not received a single request from anybody asking, why are you trying to look at my TV? We get emails asking, why are you looking at my web server? We do not have people asking, why are you looking at my control system? There's very little visibility going on in that area. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement. And with that, I'll open up for questions. Thank you very much.
Phenomenal presentation, John. What an amazing show of thought leadership, and we're really happy and proud that you came here to Huntsville to showcase what you know and share your information about IC control and control systems, and we really appreciate you being here. On behalf of Cyber Huntsville and the Mayor of Huntsville, I'd like to give you this token of our appreciation. Thank you. Thank you very much. Please, everybody, come next year, June 6th through the 8th, 2017. Hope to see you there. Thank you so much. Thanks so much.